The question that I am getting into today is how to get through university when you have a mental illness or you're struggling. So the person that asked this struggles with PTSD, but this can apply if you're struggling with depression or anxiety or just the stress and pressure and transition of being in university. So this will apply to all of that. So I want to get into that and really talk through that and offer some advice and some tips and kind of work through that a little bit. And I love this question because it's so relevant, and it's something that I have been through myself, and so many of my friends who are in really great places now and are really successful also struggled in university. And I have a lot of clients who are going through it right now, and it feels like the end of the world and that their plan isn't going to work out and they're not going to be able to make it, and there's so much pressure around that. So I want to talk through some tips and some advice here, but I also want to normalize that this struggle is so common, and it's a little blown out of proportion with how much pressure we put on a plan to look a certain way at a certain time. And life just sometimes doesn't work out like that, right? Like sometimes you may have to step away from school for whatever reason. Maybe you have to take care of yourself or learn some skills or be able to really kind of cope a little bit better before you can step back in, or maybe finances change that, or something else changes that. The path doesn't always look, really never looks the way we plan it to look, right? So I also want to normalize that this struggle is really real and it feels like the end of the world, but even if it takes a very different turn than you thought it was going to take, it still will work out and can work out, maybe in a different way than you thought down the line, but it still will work out and you can get through it. And the curve and the struggle of all of this, it's so real. And I apologize if you guys can hear drums in the background. There's like a drum fest going on down in the valley and it's echoing up here. It sounds really loud for me, but it wasn't super loud in the test I just did, so I hope it's not too distracting for you guys. But this is such a huge struggle, and when this question was submitted, I started thinking about kind of my time in university and what a struggle that was, especially at first when I was figuring out how to really be all on my own and dealing with everything that was going on, and just kind of that whole transition was really tough, and dealing with the pressure to succeed while also wanting to fit in and go out and have fun and all of that. It was really overwhelming. And my first year, even 2 years, were pretty rough. pretty rough as far as school goes, grades go, all of that went. And I also remember some of my roommates really struggling, and one in particular really struggled with pretty deep depression. And when she would go into kind of her more low states, she would really struggle to ever get out of bed. Sometimes she would even get ready and then go to school and go into the classroom, and she would get too anxious and walk home and go back to bed. So that happens a lot, and I think it's not talked about enough because I've heard so many stories like that where people just really struggle and really struggle to get through, and it feels like they're alone and they're the only ones who are struggling with this, but that's just so not true. And that roommate is super successful now and went on to get a master's degree and is really doing well. But there are a few things that I think are really important to address here. One, that you need support, and some schools really do a good job at supporting their students and some don't. So if you do have a counseling center that you can utilize, I would suggest trying that out. But also, if you do try it and it doesn't work that well, don't give up, because some schools just aren't very good at that. So I worked at a university counseling center for a little while. It was actually the Women's Resource Center, and we were, I think, my biased opinion is that we were better at supporting students than the counseling center, especially minority students or non-traditional students. We did a much better job at supporting them and helping them and kind of understanding the struggles that they faced. So if there's also a center like that, I would suggest reaching out to them for sure for help and support, because people who get it really get it and can help you navigate this. And it's not a you should give up situation, it's a there's probably some different ways that we can go about doing this. And some schools are also really good at adjusting if you need adjusting. So I even wrote a letter for a client who struggled with really severe PTSD, and we worked with the disability center to help her get some adjustments, because she really struggled sometimes. She would get triggered sometimes in front of big groups, and so we had to adjust some of the tests and some of the criteria of class. And that is something that schools should do. They should adjust those things for you. It can be scary to advocate for yourself for that, especially if you're doing it alone. So again, I would suggest getting help and support in that. But if those adjustments are going to help you stay in school and be able to work through the stress, then that is so important to do. And it's not, I mean, some people kind of have that feeling like, oh, but if I can't do it the normal way, then I shouldn't do it, or I can't do it, or, you know, all of those voices come up, but that's just not true. The school system traditionally is built in a very certain way that only fits a small amount of people, and it needs to be adjusted so you can better access that. And if those adjustments help, like taking a test by yourself instead of with a group, or maybe a written exam instead of an oral exam, or an oral exam instead of a written exam, those adjustments can and should be made. And if those aren't happening, then get support in advocating for yourself for those things to happen. Because those small changes sometimes can really help, especially if it's anxiety or that kind of stuff that you're struggling with. So definitely get some support and advocate for yourself. And again, kind of on the normalizing this whole struggle vein, I think it really is kind of a part of the process for some people, and it's really difficult sometimes. And when I look back too, some of the reasons it was difficult for me were that I hadn't found my ways of working through things yet. I hadn't found the systems and the habits that help me to get through really stressful times or difficult times. I hadn't found any of those yet, so I was just kind of floundering and trying to push through, and then giving up, and then trying again, and then giving up, and I hadn't developed those systems yet. So now I have those systems. So even if it's more of a stressful time or a downtime, I have things in place that can help me get through what I need to get through and get through my day. And those are things like, you know, the way I prioritize things, and the way I identify what's the most important, and know that sometimes I can only get through the one most important thing in my day, and I'm not going to get to all the other little things. But because I prioritize that, that's okay. That's still a win if I only get through one of those things. So sometimes developing those systems can be really helpful, like developing kind of reward systems or kind of routines to help you fall asleep easier, or routines to help you study a little bit easier or wake up easier, that kind of stuff. You can develop some routines that really help so much with that. And continually pushing through when it's not working isn't really that effective, because we don't have endless amounts of motivation. Eventually you're going to burn out and run out of motivation and feel bad about yourself, and then just keep kind of cycling that way. But if we step back, maybe we can examine some routines. So what is my study routine? What does that look like? When do I usually study? When is that easier? When is it not? When is it a struggle? And we can examine that a little bit and really develop some systems that will help you a little bit better in achieving your goals and getting through all of this. And if you need help with that, again, that's something that you can reach out to people with and really get some support with. That's something that I can help you with. That's something that other counselors or coaches can also help you with, or the resource center on campus can help you with. Developing those kind of systems, and also developing some coping skills, because that's another huge piece where I look back, again, just for myself in school, I didn't have really good coping skills yet. I didn't know how to handle stress and frustration and really negative self-talk. I didn't know how to do that yet. I didn't know how to cope very well with that. So finding coping skills that can help you deal with that is also so important and so helpful. And it really needs to be consciously looked at. So all of these things sound like, oh yeah, I can do that, or that's something I can look at. But then it really is going to take conscious effort and work to find those coping skills, to find those routines, and to practice that. And along this whole process, giving yourself the space and the permission to be like, this is hard, and that's actually normal. There's nothing wrong with me per se. This is a struggle. I have these struggles, and I can still do this, and I can still make this work, but it's going to take some extra effort. It may not look the way I thought it was going to look. Maybe I'm going to have to adjust, and that's okay. So those are some of my suggestions and tips. And I mean, university isn't for everyone. Sometimes there's alternative routes that we find, and they end up working a lot better for us. And really, that's not a loss either. That's a change in your plan, and kind of maybe something that you didn't expect happening, but can still work out. So I don't think it's like a make or break that you have to stay in university either. But there also are these things that you can do to help support you, to help you work through some of that stress and that pressure, and get through. So those are things that I think are really helpful for everyone to do, and everyone to kind of work through. And if you have specific struggles and illnesses as well, and trauma, getting support for those specific things is going to be really helpful. Because if you have PTSD, like this person asked, and it comes up in certain ways, and maybe it knocks you out for a while when it comes up, those kind of things need to be addressed and worked through. And those are things that you can get some support and some healing in. And even if you're not all the way, healed, whatever that looks like for you, you can get some support in those things. So identifying what your major triggers are, figuring out how to cope with those a little bit better, or deal with them when they come up, figuring out how to structure your day around that kind of stuff so you can be your most productive self when you're least likely to be triggered or struggling, or that kind of stuff. And then also getting some work to process through that so it's not coming up as much, and you can be moving along kind of in the healing journey as you go as well. And it may not be, if you're in a really stressful time, it may not be the time to dive really deep into that trauma, but it's definitely worth working through and trying to work through and process a little bit, especially as it's coming up. So those are some of my tips. Please let me know if you have any questions or anything that you want me to go into further. And if you are struggling with these things, please reach out to me and see if I can kind of help support you as well, especially if you're not finding that, in your space or on campus. So I'm happy to help. I know how hard this is, and it's so hard to go through alone. So keep trying, don't give up, reach out to me, get some support.